Professor,
Yes, Carol.
there's something that's been bothering me.
What is it?
Our model, NAS, has just 10 people. Is it realistic to keep the same number? Don't countries with large populations have special economic problems? Isn't the number of people in a country an important consideration?
Well, it can be and often is. Let's take a look back at our model. As a matter of fact, remember Roz? Remember that other country with a standard of living of only $10,000? Let's use Roz as an example. Roz has had some natural disasters and some political upheaval, and it does have plenty of people. And remember what we determined $10,000 was? It was what we described as minimum living conditions, enough to barely get by. What would happen if the leader of Roz decided either to paint more stripes down the roads or do some other worthy project with government funds? What happens if he takes a substantial amount of taxes, call it bucks, call it goods and services, call it part of the gross national product, out of the economy to paint more lines down the street? What happens to that average $10,000 a year income for his people?
Professor, it has to go down.
Well, you are correct. It has to go down. But remember, they were already at the barely get by level. What kind of shape are the people of Roz in now? What happens to people who don't have adequate shelter, enough to eat, clothes on their backs? Tom, you are the history teacher. What do these people do?
They starve, they steal, they plunder other countries, or they have a revolution.
Exactly. It's all in the history books. It's going on today.
Professor,
Yes, Jeff.
can people from other countries help them?
Yes, Jeff, they do. But so often that help means not just feeding the people of Roz. Unfortunately, so much of the help goes to their great leader, who insists on painting more stripes down the road. Or the people of Roz go so long with help from Nas that after a while they expect it, even demand it. Sooner or later, the people of Nas say, "We're not going to help you people of Roz. It lowers our standard of living. You help yourself." Now let's get to the question. For the sake of discussion, let's suppose that Roz has 100 people in it, including its leader, the great leader of Roz. And he has decided, knowing it's a fairly poor country, that everybody is going to make the same amount of money. They all work at different jobs, but they are all going to make the same amount of money, $10,000 a year. As a matter of fact, even the leader only makes $10,000 a year because he is noble. Then a couple of things happen. Spilling into Roz come 50 refugees from the neighboring warring country, and also 50 little citizens of Roz were born. So now the population of Roz is 200, not 100, and let's suppose the 100 new additions produce nothing. What's the standard of living in Roz now?
Well, Professor, it's the same amount of goods and services, the same gross national product, but spread over twice as many people, so it has to be half as much. Is that right? $5,000?
Right you are, Carol, but remember, Roz was already at the poverty level. Any lessening of the income because of new economic factors drives down the standard of living. So we've got what, Tom?
We've got big trouble, sir.
But, Professor,
Carol?
the 50 little babies really don't demand that much. And why couldn't the 50 refugees work and add to the gross national product?
Carol, they can. What we've done is take both extremes. Usually what happens is, yes, babies don't require much of the gross national product to live. However, babies do have a tendency to grow up. The question then, are there jobs? The significant point is, should those refugees work and each one earn and produce $10,000 a year, then they would have no effect at all on the economy or the standard of living. And when those babies become adults, if each one were to produce an additional $10,000 a year, the standard of living for everybody would remain exactly the same. However, that doesn't happen. What happens is jobs are already scarce, and instead of producing, these newcomers are usually supported, at least in part, by the people already there, thereby lowering everybody's standard of living. And then in those countries with population problems, additional people create problems over and above the ones that were there before these additional people came on the scene.
Professor,
Yes, Jeff.
it sounds like what you're saying is increasing population doesn't really mean people are going to be worse off if those that increase the population can contribute to the economy proportionate to their increase.
Bingo, Jeff. But it may be helpful to say the same thing, but from the other side of the coin. If a country does have a population problem, that is, too many mouths to feed and not enough food, it would serve the country well if the number of mouths to be fed were limited, so the country could get to the business of increasing the amount of food needed.
Sir, pardon me. That sounds so elementary. I don't even see why there should be a problem in anybody understanding it.
Jeff, the economic solution is elementary. The political solution is not elementary. People are driven or affected by tradition, by faith, by politics, especially by politics. In any event, how would you sum up the effect of population versus economics?
I would say as the number of people are added to an economy, if the gross national product of the economy does not increase proportionately, the standard of living for the country has to go down.
You've got it. Too bad some countries don't understand such a fundamental concept. Think of all the starvation that could be eliminated. But let's go on. Inflation. Very briefly now, Carol, what causes inflation?
I really don't know, but I think it has to do with unions asking for more and more money, which makes prices higher.
Tom, what causes inflation?
Well, I think it's a number of things, but what I thought was the biggest contributing factor is businesses crave so much profit that it takes more money out of the working man's pockets, which makes the prices higher and gives us inflation.
Jeff, how about you?
Professor, I don't know what causes inflation.
Jeff, yours is the only accurate answer. Let's suppose one year that Nas had a total of $160,000 in circulation. And in Nas, there existed a total of 10,000 things, which we'll call goods and services. So we have $160,000 divided by 10,000 things, or each thing averages $16. Now let's suppose, in order to pay for another program, the whiz decides that he'd better not push the people too far. They've been taxed enough, and he's edgy. He thinks maybe, if they're taxed much more, there might be a revolution, as in 1776. So then, let's suppose Whiz goes to the constituency and says, folks, I'm not at all that happy with the lines drawn down the middle of the street. We're still having some accidents, and what Nas needs and must have are wider lanes down the street so everybody is safe and happy. However, remember, he's afraid to tax anymore. So he says, fine, don't worry anybody. I'll get the money. Then he goes down to the printing press and runs off, let's say, $40,000 needed to pay for the project. Now, what do we have? We have the land of Nas with wider stripes. But let's take a look at the economy. Now there are $200,000, and remember, still 10,000 things. We now have $200,000 divided by 10,000 things equals $20 per thing. So what used to cost $16 per thing now costs $20 per thing because the government printed a bunch of extra bucks. And that, student, is inflation.
You're kidding, Professor. That's what inflation is?
Yes, that's all it is. Inflation is the lessening of the buying power of the buck caused by the government pumping money into the economy in order to feed its ever-increasing appetite for programs which require more bucks. If anyone else prints money, he goes to jail. But the government gets away with it because the people don't understand. The government is the only winner, since as incomes go up because of inflation, the government taxes a bigger share of your income because you're in a higher tax bracket, even though your buck buys less. The devaluation of the country's currency causes prices to rise, and then, Carol, the unions don't have any choice but to demand higher wages. They have to just be able to live the way they did before inflation, because things cost more. And Tom, businessmen have no choice but to raise prices on their goods and services because things and salaries cost more. If they don't, they're going out of business. Unions or businesses do not cause inflation, rather they are the victims of inflation. Think of someone adding water to milk with the intention of fooling people into thinking there is more milk. Yes, there's more to drink, but one has to drink more than before to get the same nourishment. Students, this is another of the very important fundamentals of economics.
Professor, does printing money always cause inflation?
Almost always, Carol. There's only one way it doesn't, but that doesn't happen often or for long. Let's go back to Nas with $200,000 and 10,000 things. Suppose the whiz runs off 10% more money, or $20,000 for a project. Now there's $220,000 in Nas. But let's also suppose in that same year, the people of Nas get more industrious and produce an additional 10% more goods and services or things. 10,000 plus 10% equals 11,000 things. On the first hand, $200,000 divided by 10,000 things equals $20 per thing as the average price of things. Afterward, they had $220,000 divided by 11,000 things equals $20 per thing. No inflation because production went up as fast as the money increased. Therefore, in real life, while such an event occurs for short periods of time, our economy historically has ups and downs called cycles. When the cycle is up, with production increasing, inflation is slight. When it's on the downside, there's more inflation since production doesn't keep up with the additional money.
Professor, is printing money the only source of inflation?
No, Tom. It also comes from credit, from the fractional reserve method of banking.
Say what?
When someone is given credit, all of a sudden money appears from nowhere. But that's another subject, Tom, and it's more difficult to understand. We don't need to understand it right now.
But Professor, what's so bad about inflation? If prices and then wages go up, doesn't that kind of offset things?
Jeff, you have hit on one of the sorest points and one of the least understood of all, the fundamentals of economics. Let's go back to Nas and see what happens. Let's look at our latest situation in Nas and try to compare the effects of inflation in Nas to the effects of inflation in our country. In Nas, things that used to cost $4 now cost $5. Remember, the gross national product went from $160,000 up to $200,000 in money, but the actual goods and services stayed the same. 200 minus 160 equals 40. 40 divided by 160 equals 1/4 equals 25% inflation. Now what happens? The first thing that happens is that people, like the doctor, say, I used to charge $8 for a house call, now I'll just charge 10 because my costs are up. When the movie producer says, we used to sell tickets for $4 for one of my shows, and now we are going to charge 5 because my costs are up. So he has the signs changed to show the price increase from 4 to 5. Inflation really isn't that much of a problem to people in the higher income levels. And of course, the baker has to erase the chalkboard, which says 80 cents for a loaf of bread, and make it $1. The tailor, instead of charging $40 for a jacket, now has to charge $50. But as we come down the line, let's take a look at the whiz. He's making $25,000 a year and says it costs me more now to live than it did before, so I'm just going to vote myself a raise which he has never hesitated to do in the past. You see, he has the authority the people of Nas gave it to him. Let's take a look at the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. Let's look at our artist, now unemployed and receiving $15,000 a year from the Wiz. Prices started creeping up because the new stripes and the new money the Wiz had printed, and the artist is finding it more and more difficult to get by on $15,000 a year. His rent has gone up, food has gone up, services have gone up. First thing you know, he can't afford to go to any more movies because the bucks that used to go to an occasional movie must now go to higher food costs. And things get tough, so the artist gets back to the Wiz and says, I can't make it on this. I've got to have more. So to make a long story short, he is finally given more. But let's say a year has passed in this process. What happened to his standard of living in that year, students?
Down, Professor. Obviously, since during the year his $15,000 couldn't buy what they did last year.
That's right. So inflation causes the people on government assistance to suffer through the process until or if there is a fundamental adjustment upward, and all that adjustment does is get them back to where they were before. That is barely getting by, only to find out another round of inflation is going to make them poorer, even though they have more bucks than they did before. And the process doesn't stop so long as there is inflation. Inflation guarantees poverty because it causes poverty, and the government causes inflation because it, and only it, prints money. Now, students, let's take a look at our janitor who makes $10,000 a year. We call that the poverty level. His contribution to the land of Nas is not considered as significant as the others, and he is paid accordingly. But what happens now when inflation hits him? What happens with that 25% increase because of the new stripes down the road? Because the government helped someone. Well, let's see. Prices start to creep up on him. Now the janitor doesn't buy new clothes. He never goes to a movie because he can't afford it. When he buys bread from the baker, he buys leftover bread from the day before because the baker gives him a cut rate price. When his back is hurting him, he doesn't go to the doctor. He can't afford it. It isn't a matter like it was with the artist who gave up going to movies. This man has nothing to give up. He is living on bare essential as it is. Can he raise his wages? His superiors say, what do you mean you want more money? All you do is sweep up, man. Okay. We can't pay more than we are paying now. Our prices are up 25%. Either you keep your $10,000 a year or we'll get one of those people from the land of Roz who would be grateful to have the job you're griping about. So the janitor says to himself, I'm trapped. What am I going to do? Then he sees the artist who is already making $5,000 more than him and not even working, and also got a big raise from the Wiz. What does the janitor do? He says, this is dumb. I'm going to the Wiz, which he does, and convinces Wiz that he should be unemployed too, because he simply cannot make it unemployed. He is facing inadequate shelter, insufficient food, no medical help. He could literally die. Wiz, feeling bad about this, goes back to the people of Nas, and they say, sure, let's help this poor guy out. So what do we have now? We have another producer turning non-producer, living on the workers' bucks, lowering their standard of living. All of this not because he doesn't want to work, but because he can make more money by not working. And all this because of inflation. Inflation saps the will of an economy. It causes and maintains poverty and is rightly known as the most evil of all taxes to mankind because it disproportionately hurts poor people. Inflation is not much bother to high-income people. It is a definite bother to middle-income people. It is a bloodsucker and poverty perpetuator to poor people, and only the government benefits because it gets more money to spend on more things. And history shows that whenever the government gets more money, it just spends more money.
Professor?
Yes, Tom?
I do agree with everything you've said, but I'm bothered by a kind of impression.
Go on, Tom.
It almost sounds like poor people are the cause of so many of the country's financial problems. It's hard to buy that.
Tom, if you think that, I'm not doing my job very well. First, poor people don't cause inflation. Inflation causes people to be poor, which causes more inflation, which causes more poverty. It's like a dog chasing its tail. There's no end to it. But you must look at the reasons the government prints money, which in turn causes inflation. These reasons are many, and many have nothing to do with poor people. Look at the fat cats who deduct their yachts and luxury trips, criminals draining billions from the economy, and others not even paying taxes. Defense contractors charging scandalous sums for ordinary items, military weapon systems that don't work or aren't essential. Things like this are contributing factors to why the government feels it needs to spend more and then just justifies the spending by printing. But only the printing press actually causes inflation.
Thanks, Professor.
The tool, students. Now we have to stop for a while in our learning in order to develop something new, but very necessary.
Okay, Professor.
When fire was discovered, people's comfort increased. When the wheel was invented, transportation got better. When the telescope was invented, scientists were able to learn so much more, and so on. Through the ages, each of these sciences has discovered or invented tools for the sake of enhancing the science itself in order to better the welfare of mankind. The science of economics has and does use many tools, but in my mind, it has always been missing one vital tool. So why don't we just create that tool today and thereby increase your ability to understand economics?
Go ahead, Professor. We're with you.
Remember, when they shot down Flight 007?
This is economics?
Bear with me. Their immediate response was they didn't shoot down that plane. What were they doing?
I guess they were lying, sir.
Right, Tom, because a few days later they said, yes, we did shoot it down, but the Americans made us do it. Now what were they doing, Jeff?
Lying, sir?
Probably, but not necessarily. Carol?
Deceiving, sir.
Probably, but you couldn't prove it. Tom?
Couldn't it be, sir, that the person making the statement really believed he was telling the truth?
Possibly, also. Let's look at it this way, students. Take that same statement, yes, we shot down the plane, but the Americans made us do it. Suppose this is told to 10 average Americans. How many do you think would believe it?
Probably none.
What if the same statement were made to 10 average Russians? How many do you think would believe it?
All of them.
Well, Tom, probably not all of them, but certainly some of them. And this is the effect they wanted. Now, this is the problem. What do you call it when a person makes a statement that maybe sounds like a lie, but there is no way at the time you can prove it's a lie? But he makes it because he wants you to believe him and do as he wants you to do.
Let's see, Professor. You're asking what do you call it when somebody tells you a big lie, but there is no way in the world you can prove it's a big lie. And he may not even care if you find out later, as long as he was able to get you to do what he wanted you to do at the time.
That's very close. I can't think of any descriptive word. Well, students, it's my opinion that the science of economics has suffered for centuries because it does not possess that word, a tool which adequately describes a situation, since understanding that situation and recognizing it is of paramount importance to the science of economics. So why don't we just create one?
Okay, Professor. Should it be a long word?
Students, our Native Americans had a good way of saying it when the white man made promises or treaties.
You mean white men speak with forked tongue?
Right, Carol. Now, is there any typical occasion or circumstances where we hear that kind of talk, and especially from politicians? You bet.
How about using campaigning?
That's already a word. We need something new.
Well, how about just painting? Pain kind of has a double meaning, and it's sure a new word.
And it rhymes with chain, disdain, drain, feign, pain, stain, vain, profane, and insane. It's a winner. Do you agree, Professor?
I do. Let's try it, Tom. Let's see how it works. When they said, we didn't shoot down 007, what were they doing?
They were lying.
Now, Tom, when they later said, we shot down 007, but the Americans made us do it, what were they doing?
They were paining us.
How did that feel, Tom?
It felt right, sir. This is going to work.
Let's try a few of them, students. Let's go back to Nas and look at some of the things that happened. But look at them now with the knowledge you've gained and with your new tool. When the Wiz said to the people of Nas, that poor farmer, he's worked all these years harder than anybody else, and it's only fair and right he now be supported by the government of Nas. What was he doing, Carol?
Professor, he was painting the people.
How do you know that, Carol?
Because, first of all, Nas was deprived of the farmer's production. And we know if production goes up, Nas gets better, and if the production goes down, Nas gets worse. Not only does Nas lose the farmer's production, it loses the added bucks to support the farmer. So the standard of living for the country went down, but the Wiz didn't explain that up front to the producers. What he probably wants is the farmer's vote.
So the people got what, Carol?
They got pained, sir.
What do you suppose the Wiz got?
He probably got the farmer's vote for life.
Jeff, how about when the Wiz told the good folks of Nas the streets need wider stripes on them, but don't worry, he's not going to tax them anymore. He's going to print some money, and they will be okay.
That sounds like classical painting, Professor, because we know printing that money leads to inflation, and inflation is just another tax, except it's probably the worst tax of all because it hurts poor people the most.
And Tom, when Wiz tells the voters how interesting it would be to finally find out if hoot owls hoot more on hot nights or cold nights, what did he do?
Well, Professor, he pained them.
Why, Tom?
He pained them because, when he told them it would be interesting, that much is probably so, but he didn't say it was going to cost them. He didn't tell them their standard of living would go down a bunch of bucks to find out those things. Had the voters thought about it that way, they might have said, let us continue in ignorance a little more with respect to the hootability of our night creatures in order that we may have adequate, necessary things for our everyday lives.
Now, students, we are ready to debunk economics. The debunking. Students, I remember one man who ran for president during very trying times for this nation when he ran for office. He did so under the banner of ultra-fiscal conservatism, whereby he would cut back the size of the government and its programs, but instead, after being elected, he created massive government programs. Some criticize him for changing the country from a nation of enterprising, self-sufficient people into a welfare state where hard-working producers have to support all kinds of non-producers. Then you have other people who view him as something of a savior who rescued this country from economic disaster. Students, let's not get taken up with either side of this argument. The point I'm making is the man said he would do one thing, he gets elected on that, and then turns around and does something else.
Sounds like a little painting went on there, Professor.
Then, students, along came another president who was determined to wage war on poverty, to do away with poverty. As a result, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars were bled from the economy to wage the war on poverty, with the bottom line being that today we have all the debts of this war, but we still have the same portion of our country in poverty.
What a ripoff. Why don't they stop doing that? What is it going to take for them to see it hasn't worked? Seems like we'd be way better off now had we not spent all that money. Everybody, especially the poor people, would have been better off because of the inflation it caused.
Then, students, along comes another president who says What this country needs is to restore its fiscal integrity, to cut taxes, to cut deficits, to reverse the growth of government.
And then what happened, Professor?
Then he outspends all the others put together.
Our own president? That's terrible. That's insane. Pained again.
Now, don't misunderstand me, students. These presidents are thought of as very honorable people, all fiercely patriotic, wanting nothing but the best for the United States and its people.
But, Professor, it doesn't sound like they were above painting the people, too.
The history books say you're right, Jeff. Why do you suppose that is, Carol?
Maybe they think they know what's right for us and can therefore justify any kind of method at all.
Possibly. Tom?
Maybe they do it out of some kind of greed. I've noticed some politicians seem to come into office poor and leave very rich.
Possibly. Jeff?
Maybe they think we're too dumb to understand economics. Or maybe they didn't understand economics themselves.
Well, that's probable. The point is they do it. But remember, students, don't spend your time pointing fingers at presidents. Presidents can't authorize one dime. It's the members of Congress who do the spending. Sure, the president has influence, but only Congress has the legal right. Carol.
Professor, I seem to get the feeling you feel this country is in a world of hurt, and that it's congressmen who put it there.
Who else could have put it there? Yes, Tom?
So it sounds, sir, for the price of a vote, the congressman will do something to hurt the country, either deliberately or out of ignorance. Painting away like crazy, making believe it's all for the ultimate benefit, and that there's nothing at all difficult to understand about economics. But it's the politicians who screw things up.
Tom, you have debunked economics.
Professor?
Yes, Tom?
Are you saying that's all there is to economics?
Not at all, Tom. What you have learned are some of the basics which have a direct effect on the welfare of each person in the world. Basics that apply everywhere and at all times. Basics that do not change. Basics that apply to any economic entity. Yes, Jeff?
Professor, is this country being destroyed from within?
That's what the President's Council of Economic Advisors has concluded. Jeff?
Well, Professor, a couple of things become very clear to me. I understand the politicians keep passing laws and spending money, resulting in lowering production. And they keep passing laws and spending money, increasing the size of the government. And this results in the constant weakening of our country. And also I understand the way they're able to get away with all this by painting. But what I can't understand, Professor, is how we got into this mess in the first place.
Jeff, you may never ask a more important question in your life. The answer goes back over 2 centuries. When our forefathers wrote the Constitution, they produced one of the most ingenious instruments in the history of the world. What developed from that document was a land of freedom and prosperity, the likes of which has never been seen on earth. But remember, Jeff, it was developed by people, not by magicians. It was developed by men who could only see the world around them, certainly not the world of the future. They could envision the future, but they couldn't see it. In no way were they perfect. Evidence this by the many amendments to the Constitution. And you think, if you would, of one graphic example of their imperfection. The leaders of our country in the day condoned slavery, and today we despise it. When the Constitution was drafted, it was supposed the government would be made up of volunteer politicians who would do their politicking on a temporary basis and then return to their original businesses. In other words, the farmer who became the representative would serve for a few years and then go back to the farm. The lawyer who was elected to the Senate would serve his term and then go back to be a lawyer. Never in their wildest dreams could our forefathers have imagined the career politician, much less the career bureaucrat, who today control our country. The unfortunate truth of the matter, Jeff, is that most of our politicians, their first day in office and all the following days of their term, are preoccupied with being elected for another term and another term and another term. And the longer they are in office, the better they get at painting.
But can't the people see through this, Professor?
Jeff, let me draw an example. Let's say a drug addict is talking with Dr. A. The drug addict says, "Doctor, I'm hurting bad." And the doctor says, "My advice is to go to a drug rehabilitation clinic. This program will take many months. The first thing you do is go through withdrawal, and you will be completely miserable. But in the end, there will be a decent chance of kicking your dependency on drugs, so you may straighten out your life. Now, Jeff, suppose the same addict is talking to Dr. B, who says, "You're hurting bad. Oh, you poor thing. Would you like me to give you a fix?" Jeff, which doctor do you think he would choose?
No contest, Professor.
Now, let's take a look at the economic addict who is addicted to government checks. He talks with politician A, who says, "You vote for me and I will show you how, if you are willing to bite the bullet, to wrestle with initial hard times, so we may strengthen the country by increasing production and seriously roll back the involvement of government in order to reduce spending, part of which is your paycheck, and thereby raise the gross national product in order to make the country more prosperous, so you will be able to get away from your dependency and be your own person." Then he talks with politician B, who says, "Vote for me. I know you're hurting. I will see to it that the government gives you bigger checks." Jeff?
I see, Professor. Politician B wins in a landslide.
Politician B wins. The checks get bigger. The inflation gets worse. The economic addict is back to where he was before because his bigger check won't buy as much as his smaller check bought before. And all the while he's waiting to get back where he was. His check buys less and less, and poor people can't afford anything less. To the economic addict, politician A is evil because he won't get a fix from him, and he will no doubt vote for politician B again and again and again.
But, Professor, couldn't we do something so the addict would understand?
Jeff, I've learned from this stay on Earth that people listen to what they want to hear.
Are you saying people are bad or dumb, Professor?
Not at all, Jeff. I'm only saying people are what they are.
Professor, do all politicians pain?
No, Tom, just the overwhelming majority. And it's amazing how many sincere, non-painting campaigners learn the art of painting their first day in office, because that's when they start running for their second term.
What makes politicians that way, Professor?
Tom, I've got them down to 3 categories. Category 1 is the politician who is not only a confirmed liar, but may even be crooked. His purpose for being in politics is self-serving. He will do or say anything to serve himself first, regardless of the cost to others. We've seen many of them. Some of them come to office poor and leave rich. Some get indicted and go to jail. Some even resign under fire. They say, "I will help you." But what they are thinking is, "I will help you because it will help me. I don't care who I hurt, but what I want is your vote." I would guess this represents a small minority of politicians. The second category will say, "I will help you," but what they really mean is, "I will help you. I am oblivious to any harm it might do, and should something arise whereby helping you looks like it may lose votes for him, I will then change accordingly."
In other words, Professor, he's basically a good guy with good intentions until the situation looks like it may take some votes away from him, and then he will act like the fellow in Category 1.
I would guess, Tom, that the majority of our politicians are in this category. The third bunch are the ones that say, "I will help you," and they do. They will even help you if it kills you or someone else. Helping is akin to breathing. Stop helping and you might as well stop breathing. Don't ever evaluate what harm all these helping may do to others as long as you help, because it's right. These, Tom, are also in the minority, but by far are the most dangerous.
Why, Professor?
Well, Tom, they believe so fervently and act out of such strong conviction, and they are so dedicated that sometimes the sheer force of their beliefs is what is right and what is fair carries through to government programs. and more government programs and more government programs.
I understand, Professor. Taken alone, each of these things seem to have merit, but put them all together and the camel's back breaks. And in order to give someone something, it first has to be taken away from somebody. In order to help someone, they have to hurt someone else.
Tom, you understand. So now, students, how do you feel about economics?
I think it's easy to understand, Professor.
So do I.
And how would you feel about the politician, students, who says economics is far too complicated to understand? Don't try to be simplistic. Trust me, I know what's best for you. Vote for me. Tom?
He's painting.
Carol?
He probably doesn't understand economics himself, so he says to everyone who does that they are being too simplistic.
Jeff?
All he wants is the vote.
All right, students, we have now come to a crossroads. We understand that when production goes up, people are better off. When production goes down, a few persons may or may not be better off, but people in generally are worse off. As government grows, the economy weakens and people are worse off, even though a certain few people, due to the programs, could be better off. Government programs are like straws on the camel's back. Each government program is like taking blood from one's body, and there comes a point where the body cannot survive. So tell me, students, what do we do about it?
Good grief, Professor. You don't mean a revolution?
Carol, this is just what happened in many countries. We're not at that point. Why don't we just figure out what our options could be? Tom?
Professor, I understand there's a serious movement going on to amend the Constitution so Congress must maintain a balanced budget all the time. Would that work?
Tom, in reality, this is something of an effort made out of futility by people who are sick and tired of government irresponsibility. But in reality, I don't think it would help.
Why, sir?
Well, first of all, the attempt now is only to convene an assembly where such an amendment would be considered. No way does that mean an amendment would be adopted, only considered. And let's suppose it is adopted, Tom. Chances are the economy would collapse before this rather long and tedious process were consummated. And even if it were consummated before a collapse, you can be pretty well assured there would be enough loopholes to allow the politicians to get their pet vote-getting programs enacted. And a balanced budget is not the central problem. A budget can be balanced by simply raising taxes. But we've learned that raising taxes, that is taking money from workers for any reason, lowers the standard of living. And history shows every time taxes are raised, the politicians just spend more. However, balanced budgets would indeed halt inflation, because as we saw before, inflation comes when the government spends more than it taxes and borrows, and then has to print money. Nice try, though, Tom. But there are no solutions unless Congress rolls back spending. Yes, Carol?
Maybe we should only vote for politicians who promise to balance the budget and never to pain us.
Well, Carol, the thought is fine. However, in real life, most politicians promise just that and then revert to doing whatever it is they wanted to once they get in office. Seems to be quite a difference between what's promised and what's delivered. Jeff?
Sir, it seems like the problem with our economy is politics. I wonder if there isn't some way we could change the system so as to prevent what's been going on.
And what do you have in mind, Jeff?
Professor, could it be possible to make it so politicians can only serve one term? That way, they wouldn't need to go through the painting process to get reelected once they got in office, and could put their energies into doing something good for the country instead of for themselves.
Not a bad idea, Jeff. That's a step in the right direction. Our country used to be something like that. Tom?
But it seems, Professor, our country is so much more complicated these days. A man who has been in office several terms has gained so much knowledge and experience, and you would lose that knowledge and experience if politicians could serve only one term.
Tom, you're right. But on the other hand, would you rather have economic ruin with lots of political expertise, or economic health sacrificing some expertise?
Case dismissed, Professor.
Now, let's develop this, Jeff. Suppose we had politicians who could serve only one term. It's obvious much good could be derived from this. What else, Jeff, do you suppose we could do to avoid a collapse?
Well, Professor, could be we should never elect anybody who wants to spend more than the country takes in order to stop inflation so we can get poor people out of the trap they're in.
Well, Jeff, that's fine. However, just by saying a budget must be balanced certainly isn't the whole answer. You do understand that politicians can keep increasing the budget and yet balance it with more taxes. Carol?
That's right, Professor. Instead of just balancing the budget, it also needs to be limited, or else the national debt will keep going up.
Carol, did you ever think about those words?
What words, sir?
National debt?
Not really, sir.
What's a debt, Carol?
Well, a debt is something. It's an obligation to repay something.
Do we have a national debt, Carol?
I don't understand.
The money the government borrowed. Is it going to pay it back?
I never thought of that, sir.
Students, have you ever heard in all your lives a single politician say he is going to see to it the government repays its debt? It borrowed money. The money is to be repaid. If the government said it wouldn't repay its debts, the economy would immediately collapse because its health depends in part on people's confidence in its integrity. Money is a notion backed by confidence.